Let's raise the big questions then. Can India really trust China? What explains this thaw in India-China ties at this moment? Is the Modi-Xi meet a signal to the West? Will India now go ahead and invite Chinese investments once again in sectors like telecom? These are some of the questions I will raise. Aina Tangen, American-Chinese political and economic affairs commentator, spoke to me a short while ago from Beijing. I'll be playing that out. KC Singh, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs, is with us. Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, former Chief of Staff at 14 Corps, with us. And Anand Krishnan, adjunct fellow, Institute of Chinese Studies. I appreciate all my guests joining me. Let me come to you, KC, first. Your first reactions. Do you see this as a major thaw? The agreement as of now seems high on optics but low on details. Disengagement, de-escalation still remain tricky issues. Should we be celebrating in any way and welcoming what's happened today in Kazan?
No, I think celebration would be premature, but certainly it's welcome that there's a channel which has opened up. But you can see some of the language which was used. Chinese president said that India should read the historical trends. I don't know what exactly he meant by that. But essentially, look, why has it happened? Now, one of the reasons is the Chinese economy is certainly facing some problems. There's a housing crisis in the housing sector. There are 90 million empty units lying all over China. 80% of the household savings of the people in China have been invested in that. The housing prices have dropped by 30%. The industrial income has dropped by almost 17.6%. So with US Trump looming on the horizon, Europeans also tightening the screws on China, the Indian market becomes very important. So I think Chinese had to swallow their pride and therefore come along. But the question remains, when we say we are reverting back to status quo ante, the details will tell us that, because the Chinese have done a lot of building of infrastructure in the meanwhile. And this is a standard Chinese trick. Even the Israelis do that. If they want till the Litani River in Lebanon, they'll go 10 kilometers further. And then, withdraw to the Litani River and say, okay, Hezbollah will not come beyond this. So Chinese may well have built up the kind of infrastructure where they're comfortable now with India patrolling, and that too, we don't know. I think we have to be telling them, and they tell us. But they may have altered the reality on the ground in the intervening 4 years.
Let me take that to Mr. Tangen. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, President Xi Jinping meeting for the first time in 5 years. Do you think it's a return to the status quo ante on the border? Is that what is going to happen really? That we will go back to a pre-March, pre-April 2020 scenario on the border?
I think it's quite clear that there's going to be a return to the 2020 status quo. There would be no reason to create this kind of excitement if that was not the case. But, what's most important here is it's not just Xi and Modi. It is also Putin, other leaders, people who are interested, 30 countries who want to be part of the BRICS plus movement. Sharp contrast to what's going on with the United States and other places where it's quite clear that people have lost faith in the United States, especially over issues like Ukraine and Gaza.
Lieutenant General Satish Kulkarni, you're hearing these Chinese voices saying that we will return to status quo ante pre-March 2020. Should we trust the Chinese? The army chief yesterday said disengagement, de-escalation still remain on the agenda. The fact, as KC Singh just points out, the Chinese have built substantial infrastructure, especially in the Depsang Plains. Can we trust the Chinese? Or are the Chinese playing at the moment once again for short term to try and get some benefits, according to KC, from the Indian markets, possibly also looking at their problems with Taiwan, and therefore we can't trust them for any permanent solution?
Rajdeep, thank you. I think, let's see it a little more positively. And I personally see a positive development because it does cool the nerves along the LAC. The tension goes down. There is no denying the fact. And also, if BRICS have to be seen as non-West and are also coming up with a view to be able to convey to G7 that they matter. It is not a unipolar world, it's a multipolar world. And in that context, when we see BRICS, where Chinese are a large contributor with almost $19 trillion economy, and you have 48% of the crude oil production in BRICS, you have about 45% of the world population, 30% of the GDP, and 30 more countries joining it probably become 75% of the world population. With that, Chinese credibility also is at stake. With that, keeping that in mind, I feel let's see positively if once the SRs meet and then the format is made, probably yes, if Chinese want a new beginning, we are there. And as everybody seems, and in China, it is top down. If Xi himself is insisting and wanting it to be done, I think let's try it out. Because, of course, capacity building is essential. Yeah.
You know, Anand Krishnan, interestingly, there were 18 meetings between Xi and Prime Minister Modi between 2014 and 19 till relations went sour. Is this very different? Some of my guests saying that this is a BRICS initiative. I've been hearing that Putin played a major role behind the scenes. Do you see this as a sign of a new arrangement because of an attempt to create a stronger global South, as some are calling it?
No, I would be slightly cautious in taking those grandstand announcements because ultimately this has to play out on the ground. And I mean, the trust is, I mean, the Prime Minister mentions about trust in three aspects in terms of mutual trust and mutual sensitivity and mutual respect. But it's not very clear that the Chinese actually do that on the ground. I mean, the army is, for instance, is somebody, both the armies are the ones who have to actually implement this on this ground, even though there has been diplomatic parleys. But how it plays out on the ground is actually very important. And as of now, we have very, very sketchy details on how this is going to be. So unless we actually see this action on the ground, only then we can actually say how much of this is actually a resolution. Frankly, as of now, there is nothing to actually say. While this is a positive development, definitely in the last 4 years, but I would be cautious in actually making any kind of big positive moves.
You know, we saw it a bit in the body language, if I may use that, KC Singh. Prime Minister Modi much more enthusiastic. If you see his body language, the Chinese is always far more wary and some would say inscrutable. You mentioned that you believe that China's economic situation is one of the reasons why they are pushing ahead with this meeting. There are others who are saying that China has concerns with Taiwan. They seem to be, you know, Chinese expansionism isn't going to stop, and therefore China needs to ensure that at least the border with India is not a hot border at the moment. How do you see this playing out? Do you believe that the Chinese are in this for the long term with India or for a short term benefit?
Well, it's difficult to say. Chinese always think long term and act short term. But I think what we must remember is that BRICS has been captured now by China and Russia. You see, initially when it began, it was 4 emerging economies. It was just China, Russia, India, and Brazil. Then the Chinese insisted, brought in South Africa, which was really not entitled to be in a large group like this. And then they had Jacob Zuma, their president, who completely destroyed the economy of South Africa. So if you take the South African economy, it was not even entitled to be at the same level as these 4 countries. But the Chinese began diluting the thing. And then that is where then the further expansion takes place. So if UAE comes in, then Iran is brought in. If Egypt comes in, they bring in Ethiopia. And there's another list of people. So it's becoming, and if you read the 134 paragraphs of the statement which has come out, it's almost like a non-aligned summit statement. They cover everything. There are about 3 paras on human rights and democracy. Excuse me, which one of these countries other than India believes in that? I mean, it's ridiculous, the kind of statements in that. Then they talk, a lot of time is spent on Gaza and on Lebanon. There's nothing about Ukraine. Ukraine, they said, all countries have made their national statements in different places. Your host is now sitting quietly watching. And then they're talking of UN Charter and how great statements supporting the UN. And here is Russia, which has attacked a neighboring country and flouted the UN Charter. So, you know, it's essentially a group that Chinese and the Russians want to use as an alternative platform to the US and its allies. Now, India is stuck in both because we are with Quad, we work with the Western sector. Now, you take technology, science and technology, huge number of paras on that. What science and technology cooperation are you going to have with China? You think they're going to share any of their technology, which is cutting edge? They want to bring down Taiwan because they want to seize the only independent chip maker country in the world, because then they want to capture that and really have that under their control. So this is really a competitive thing. India is playing both the groups. We are more comfortable with the other group. But I think the Chinese realize that don't push India too much. They don't want to push you completely into the other group. So they're carrying you along and they made this. But we'll have to be very watchful.
Very interesting the way you're putting it there, KC Singh. There are lots of geopolitical and geostrategic issues involved here. I just want to bring in Mr. Thangen again. Mr. Thangen, the border standoff ended decades of peace. As I said earlier, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi had 18 formal meetings between 2014 and 19. Mahabalipuram, Ahmedabad, it all seemed very positive. Then we saw what happened in Ladakh, and the element of trust was gone. Many are asking in India today, can India trust China? Can we trust Beijing?
Well, I would say that you would have people in China who would say the same thing. Trust is not built through words. It is built through actions. So if there's going to be a return to trust, it has to be slow, it has to be steady, and it has to be consistent.
But Mr. Thangen, what did China achieve when they upset decades of peace that was prevalent on the border? What did China gain from the last 5 years?
Well, that's the problem. From India's point of view, China was at fault. From China's point of view, India is at fault. But at this juncture, the only thing that matters is that these two countries, civilizations, are able to talk to each other, to sit down and have their leaders figure out a way to bring about a consensus of ideas about how to settle issues, not go to war.
You know, General Kulkarni, give us an insight into what the military leadership thinks about China. How do you all, when you were in the service, how do you all see China? Do you see it as an enemy? Do you see it as an adversary? Is there a trust factor given the fact that there have been from time to time these border skirmishes? How does the military view China? Forget the diplomats for a moment, forget the politicians. How do the generals on the border view it?
Rajdeep, well, I retired in 2016. Until then, I had wonderful relationships because I conducted a lot of border personnel meetings. I kept interacting with them on various levels. And I really thought at that point of time that both the countries seemed to be doing well. Even the word that they used this time, she is saying ancient civilization. Even at Bumla, when I was there, I put that word on the board, ancient civilization at Bumla. And we were really looking at it that things will look noble and things were looking brighter. Till 2020. And that is what surprises me, even till date, having retired in 2016, as to why did China do what they did in 2020. And there was no requirement. And I still would maintain that it is not difficult to go to status quo ante 2020, because that is something which is doable. I've seen it with my own eyes. I've been interacting with them. And there were how many kampai with them, I don't know. So much of love and affection that existed on ground. There was never a problem till these kind of things started occurring in 2019 and 2020 and thereon, all this. I'm myself quite surprised, and I'm sure, I feel that if it came from top, now again, if it is coming from top for normalization
would
of
you
relations
trust them?
and positive
given what happened, given what happened in Galwan, would you trust them today?
See, trust is something like, actions speak louder than words. We have to do it on ground. It's very, very important. And that trust deficit, because what they did in 2020, obviously we feel, let down, a stab in the back, that when everything was going hunky-dory, everything was fine. Why did they do that? I sincerely hope they do not repeat and do not do that. An opportunity which we must not miss, and an opportunity which would give both the countries to do well.
Anand Krishnan, you also were skeptical, said we need to find out whether the Chinese act and walk the talk on the ground. Do you believe, therefore, while what has happened today is a welcome step, we are still in for a long period where we will test each other out over the next 12 to 18 months?
Absolutely. I would say that the government was slightly more wise in terms of taking this more cautious approach. I mean, first it has to be, as I said earlier, it has to be translated on the ground, how the Chinese react to it. Just to go back, I mean, the details on, or whatever the sketchy details there are now are only from the MEA. The MOFA, or the Chinese Foreign Ministry, has simply only acknowledged that there has been some progress in negotiations, but they have not come out with actual details. So one has to actually see things for things to be believed. So that is how the approach will be. But there are other issues. In fact, the economic angle is always going to be salient. There is already talk of, especially if you look at the economic survey, there is call for more Chinese investments. So those aspects have also played a role in actually getting things, there seems to be a little hurry in getting things normalized. So those things are also going to play out. And already, even when in the last 4 years, when things were slightly cold, even then there has been pressures from within even ministries so that the visa process for Chinese technicians to be normalized. For more Chinese components, the reliance on that is something which is still there. So that is something which also needs to be remembered. So the Indian manufacturing sector, or India's manufacturing ambitions, is also somehow intrinsically connected with China and Chinese investment. So at least in the short to medium term, while the trust is definitely going to be an issue, but you might have to do business with China.
You know, interestingly, in the fiscal year 2024, bilateral trade between India and China reached what? US dollars 118.4 billion. A quick final word, KC Singh, just 30 seconds. Do you believe, therefore, we should go back to full-blown economic ties? If you recall, in 2020, there was a pushback, not just with the TikToks of the world, but there was pressure on Indian companies to possibly try and reduce their dependence on China. Can that happen, or do you believe inevitably Indian-Chinese business has to grow together?
No, I think a little more balance has to be brought into it. And the Chinese have non-tariff barriers. They have to start relaxing them. Now, you can't, when investment comes in, we've seen the Chinese investment has always got hidden elements to it. The Western countries are not stupid. Americans are not stupid. And the other thing is, if you have an excess amount of Chinese investment coming into cutting edge sectors of the economy, the Americans may pull back because they'll be worried about their technology getting pulled away by the Chinese from there. So you can't be playing this game where you want to be part of the supply chains that America is trying to create as an alternative to the Chinese supply chains, and then open the thing to the Chinese. I think it'll be selective. Certainly in the very critical sectors, we have to be very watchful. Huawei and so on and so forth, the Europeans are not stupid that they've shut the door on them. Therefore, it shouldn't be. There is a lobby in India which wants the Chinese door to be open to the Chinese, but they're only looking at economic and financial benefits. The national security angle has to be kept in mind.
Okay, let's leave it there, KC Singh. As always, to you and all my guests, thanks very much for joining me and giving us a perspective amidst all the photo ops. I think it's often good to step back and get a sense of the larger picture, which hopefully our viewers have got with that discussion on China. Thank you all very much for joining me.